There are not that many people that I am proud to know. I'm happy to know almost everybody, but there's not that many people I am proud to know. Myron Magnet is, in fact, one of those people. And Myron, he's one of the most brilliant people I've ever met. He gave me my start as a commentator, as a cultural commentator. It's a long, long story. I won't tell it now, but basically, I went to an old friend of mine who was a conservative and told him that I'd sort of become a conservative. And he said, you really have to talk to Myron Magnet. And Myron started publishing my stuff in City Journal, where I still publish, and I'm now a contributing editor. Myron is no longer the editor of City Journal, but he made that magazine into one of the great and most important magazines on the right. And now Brian Anderson has continued that tradition and expanded it in all kinds of ways. Myron is just a guy who who understands what happened. He wrote a book called The Dream and the Nightmare, which describes the way that the ideas of the 60s became the mess that we have today. The dream was the dream of what people were trying to do in the 60s, and the nightmare, of course, was what actually happened. He's got a new book out called Clarence Thomas and the Lost Constitution. And typical of Myron's brilliance, but also one of the things that I can actually say that he and I are alike in. He shares my genius for self-promotion because because he's got a new book out, and this is a fairly popular podcast. And I'm out to dinner with a friend. And he says to me, there's this brilliant new book out on Clarence Thomas. And I thought, gee, that's an interesting subject. Maybe I should get the author on the podcast to come on the podcast. So I look up the book, and it's Myron Magnet. It's my pal. He doesn't even let me know that he's got a new book out. This is a biography, obviously, of the Supreme Court justice. It examines how he became an independent, self-reliant person and had just the kind of character the founders assumed would always mark Americans, and how that helped him change the court. Myron, this is one of the things that Myron knows a lot about. His last book was about the homes, a really weird subject, but such a good subject. It was about the homes of the founders and what they had to say about the founders. We have Myron on the phone, and let's talk about it. Myron, one of the most brilliant guys I know. Myron, are you there?
Yes, and I'm so happy to hear your voice, my dear old friend.
It is great to hear from you. It's the only way I get to talk to my friends is by interviewing them at this point. So.
Good, that's success.
There you go. It is so nice to hear from you, to hear you. Truly it is. And I'm really excited about this book. I can't think of anybody better able to write about Clarence Thomas than you. Why did you pick this subject?
Well, you know that my last book, The Founders at Home,
Yep.
was, I wrote it in order to find out what kind of republic did the Founding Fathers envision, what kind of constitution did they want, and having discovered that they had brought about something unexampled in history, and that even 230 years plus later is still not only up to date but really avant-garde, I realized we didn't have it anymore. And so my next question was, okay, well, how do we lose it, and how do we get it back? And that led me to Justice Thomas, because actually in his opinions and in his speeches and in his memoir, he answers both those very important questions.
One of the things that fascinates me about Clarence Thomas is he seems to me, I'm not a lawyer, but he seems to me such a brilliant legal mind. The left has paid him no respect at all. I mean, Antonin Scalia used to get a little respect, but they've basically treated him as Scalia's just his follower. Is there any truth to that?
No, none at all.
Yeah.
You're right in thinking of him as a brilliant legal mind. I mean, here's kind of what here's what he thinks. He thinks that we have this extraordinary Constitution that does something unexampled in history. It wasn't perfect when framed because the framers couldn't get rid of slavery if they wanted to get the document ratified. But nevertheless, it was improved by the Bill of Rights. It was perfected by the Reconstruction Amendments and by the 19th Amendment that gave women the votes. And what does this Constitution do? It guarantees the individual American citizen the right to forge his own happiness in his own way, in his own families and community. That's something so utterly different from what any other regime in which people were ruled allowed. And so what he's trying to do in his jurisprudence is make that Constitution alive again. And what he says is that that Constitution was subverted by... Drew, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you fine.
Yeah, okay. So, all right, so that Constitution got subverted in a variety of ways, and he wants to undo the subversion. The first way is very, very meaningful to him. He says, hey, it's personal to me. And that was that there were two 1870 Supreme Court decisions that essentially took the 14th Amendment and said that it wasn't what it was. The 14th Amendment aimed to give the protection of the Bill of Rights to freed slaves against any depredations by state governments. The Supreme Court said, no, 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 that's not what the 14th Amendment means. And so we got this Jim Crow system for almost 100 years after that. And Clarence Thomas said, hey, I grew up under segregation in Savannah, in segregated. I couldn't walk across this park. I couldn't drink from that water fountain or go to that library. So he says, I know about oppression. Well, after that, then we had Woodrow Wilson, who comes along and says, wait, I know I have a better idea than the Founding Fathers, who are these antique guys who lived in a Newtonian universe. This is Darwin time. And we need a constitution that keeps up with the times. Well, so we need the Supreme Court sitting as a permanent constitutional convention, and this core of non-political, highly educated administrators, because now we're in the age of administration, who will tell us how to live, who will give us clean water, clean air, a good financial system, whatever. And who was his model here? Frederick the Great. In other words, an enlightened despotism, right? And this is supposed to be an advance on the Founding Fathers. Of course, anybody who had studied history, ancient and modern, would know perfectly well, as James Madison knew in framing the Constitution, that enlightenment tends to evaporate, leaving behind only the despotism. And that's what we've got. You know, did you read about this case, Drew? There's a rancher in Montana who has this trickle going through his mountain acres, so he dug a couple of ponds. The EPA comes down on him and says he's polluted the navigable waterways of the United States, fines him $130,000, imprisons him for 18 months. The nearest navigable waterway is 40, 50 miles away.
No.
And now all of this happens without a grand jury indictment, without a petty jury finding of facts, without a real Article III judge. It's an administrative judge who reports only to the EPA. He's just a bureaucrat. And he can do this to a citizen of the United States. This is not liberty. This is just plain Star Chamber tyranny. So in a series of 2015 opinions, Justice Thomas has started chipping away at the foundations of the administrative state to say something that makes laws like a legislature, carries them out like an executive, and adjudicates and punishes infractions of them like a judiciary, has, he says, no comfortable home in our constitutional structure, and he really does want to get rid of it. And now that Brett Kavanaugh has joined him on the bench, a real critic of the administrative state, we might get somewhere in that direction.
It is amazing. I mean, people don't understand, because I harp on this all the time. They don't understand the administrative state is such a bland term that they do not understand that that's where their freedom is going. It has Thomas,
down the drain.
Down the drain, yeah. I mean, has Thomas made any headway with the left, with the liberal judges?
No,
Yeah.
but he has made headway with the law professors, funnily enough. And I mean, 10 years ago, they thought he was a complete crank off
Right.
the charts. But now they realize that he is a very profound and coherent legal thinker, and that he has laid out a roadmap, really, for how the court in future can get back to the original Constitution. And and now we've got a more conservative court, and I think we're most certainly going to be going in that direction. Here's something that's kind of one of the reasons that the left really hates Clarence Thomas, is that he says, as far as the Supreme Court is concerned, there's really no such thing as constitutional law. You've got a whole bunch of opinions by judges, by courts, judgments by Supreme Courts, but they may or they may not be wrong. And if they're wrong, since we don't have any hesitation in overturning laws passed by the people's elected representatives and signed by the president, if our predecessors have been wrong, it is our duty as the High Court to say, hey, we are overturning. This is not constitutional. So, the left is always talking about settled law, by which they mean Roe v. Wade.
Yes.
And Clarence Thomas says, look, settled law was Plessy v. Ferguson that
Right.
says that separate but equal facilities for blacks and public accommodation is constitutional. No, he says, they were wrong. They were wrong, and we needed to overturn.
They were just hammering him on this for that obscure states, whatever it was about suing people in different states, where he said stare decisis can basically be overturned. Of course, it makes so much sense. Why? One of the things they've always said about him is that he must be just a follower of Scalia because he never asks any questions during the arguments. Did you get any insight into why he's such a quiet man on the bench?
I think he's very. No, I don't really know.
Okay.
I don't know,
Okay.
because he's given many different answers to that. But that he's just a follower of Scalia, no. I mean, Scalia himself said that by comparison with Clarence Thomas, Scalia is just a faint-hearted originalist. Clarence Thomas is the real thing.
Is there when you look at his decisions, is there a way that you can take originalism too far? This is an argument I've heard from liberals that you can go back to where cruel and unusual punishment doesn't include knocking people's ears or whatever. Is there a sense in which you can take originalism to be almost literalism in that sense?
No. Why would you do it?
Yeah.
The founding fathers didn't cut anybody's ears off. They were highly civilized people. That's not our tradition. So I mean, think about it. We do have a political tradition, and one of the things that I keep thinking of is how Reconstruction got subverted by these horrible 1870s decisions of the Supreme Court that then loosed not only loosed Jim Crow, but let these terrorist groups, the KKK, the Knights of the White Camellia, the White Liners, right, all over the South, what General Grant said after he had retired from the presidency is, well, all things considered, we probably should have occupied the South for a generation to make Reconstruction work. He said, but it's not our tradition. The voters wouldn't have it. This is a democracy, and we had to pull them out. So, it is a democracy. It's supposed to be.
Myron, I got to stop here. It's great talking to you. I hope we can get together next time I'm in New York. I will make a special trip to see you. The book
I can't wait.
The book is Clarence Thomas and the Lost Constitution. I can think of nobody better to write it than Myron Magnet. Myron, thanks so much for coming on.
Pleasure. Bye.
I'll talk to you. Bye. Talk about a guy, talking about the people versus the leadership. Talk about a guy who cares deeply, who is obviously an elite thinker and an urban character, but a guy who cares deeply about the effect that these things have on people. The effect that the bad leadership has on people. Myron is that guy, and it sounds to me like Clarence Thomas is that guy as well.